Okay, so here's a brief overview of The Cruel Hand, which is Chapter 4 of New Jim Crow. Okay, so brief overview at the beginning here. Basically, criminals are said to be one of the only social groups that we're taught to hate. Other groups in society are definitely discriminated against, but very few are openly scorned the way that criminals are, or maybe terrorists, right? So she connects the idea of Jim Crow to the way that we treat criminals. So this quote from the chapter, quote, like the coloreds in the years following emancipation, criminals today are deemed a characterless and purposeless people, deserving our collective scorn and contempt. So criminals get to the heart of deviance, right? They challenge the norms and values of society. Laws are the formal sanctions of society. So if you challenge those sanctions, that's a threat to society. You can be put away in prison. And it's supposed to be for the public's good, right? But also supposedly for the individual's good. But she argues that basically a cruel hand is placed upon people that are incarcerated due to their limited opportunities that they have as a result afterwards. So I'm going to show you a quick clip just to set up what she's talking about here.
Good morning, John. It's Friday. A few weeks ago, a company called Visually emailed me and was like, hey Hank, if you could do a high-quality animated video on any issue in the world, what would you choose? Now that was a hard choice, but I went with incarceration in America because it is messed up. Now, crime is also messed up. Bad things happen to good people, and that's terrible, and something should be done about it. Well, we send people to prison to be punished, and to prevent them from doing bad things again, and to deter others from breaking the law. Punishment, corrections, and deterrence. Now, we have this habit of thinking of prisoners as something very external to society. After all, there are literal walls between them and society, walls capped with razor wire and watched over by people with guns. But millions of prisoners are released each year. Today's prisoners are tomorrow's neighbors, so corrections should probably be the most important piece of the incarceration pie. Unfortunately, it is not. We are, however, really good at punishment. America has about 4% of the world's people and about 25% of the world's incarcerated people. We have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Over the last 30 years, that number has skyrocketed, increasing over 400%. 41% of American juveniles and young adults have been arrested by the time they turn 23. Children as young as 13 years old have been sentenced to die in prison. And our prisons violate international standards. Solitary confinement increases instability and violence in inmates and is considered by international law to be torture. But in America, it's not regulated by anyone except the prison officials. No judge, no jury. Arguably the most devastating form of punishment we enact in this country, and yet there is no appeals process. And you think it's hard to get a job in America? Well, we make it intentionally more difficult to get a job once you have a conviction on your record, not to mention just to live your life. Convicts are ineligible for welfare, student loans, public housing, food stamps, and are often socially disconnected from community and family support structures. So in addition to having high recidivism rates, they have very high rates of homelessness and suicide. Somewhere along the way, we started to think that being tough on crime meant being tough on criminals, but that's not the same thing. Punishment is only one piece of a much larger crime reduction pie. And it's an expensive one, with some institutions paying more than $100,000 per year per prisoner. Long prison sentences have helped to decrease crime, but no more than 25% of the decrease we've seen can be attributed to incarceration, and it costs far beyond just dollars. The cost is to people, to our country, to communities, to families, and to ourselves. The policy seems to be if you've committed a felony, we just give up on you. These wars on crime, wars on drugs, they are wars on people. The smart political move is to appear tough on crime because crime is scary, so we increased minimum sentences, we arrested more people, we sent more of them to prison. That's how we looked tough on crime, but the results are in. It's bad policy. It's cruel, it's short-sighted, and to continue this policy of mass incarceration would be foolish. We're living inside of a massive $75 billion per year failed experiment. 2010 was the first year in nearly 40 years that the number of incarcerated individuals in America did not increase. Policymakers are beginning to realize the magnitude of this failure, but there is a long way to go. John, I'll see you on Tuesday.
Okay, so also she focuses on the knowledge of the consequence of plea deals, meaning that Many people that are entering into plea deals, which again are the overwhelming majority of ways that cases are solved in today's criminal justice system, do so under stress, right? Like they're trying to provide resources for their family, they're cut off from their networks of support. They often do not fully understand the long-term consequences or the social controls that will be placed on them when they agree to that plea deal, right? So they don't understand that there might be a change in status that could be a permanent change for them. So, some of the restrictions that we discussed previously would be restrictions with voting, housing, job discrimination, welfare and other government assistance, restrictions on financial aid, etc., that follow you for life. People might not be aware when they agree to plea bargains, they just want to get out of jail and back to their life. So she argues this is creating a permanent second-class status for people because they're subjected to legal forms of discrimination, hence why she compares it to Jim Crow segregation, which was also legal forms of discrimination, right? Life becomes much harder once you have a felon or prison label. So criminals have a hard time finding a place to stay when they're released from jail. This can cause a lot of problems of stability for people that are trying to transition back into society. So first, they are denied government-funded housing. So again, we know that disproportionately the people that are swept up into the system are low income. So how are they going to afford without a job? And oftentimes, if they were in like a gang or some sort of criminal network, they are no longer able to associate with any of the people they associated with before. So that might be the only people who would let you sleep on their couch or let you stay in their apartment. Also, let's say your family, like your mother, your sister, your extended family live in public housing. You are not able to stay there, right? So also there's very tough eviction rules for felons. So, a lot of this came as a part of the war on drugs policies. So, one of the examples she gives is this case of a 42-year-old African-American man who was charged with drug possession charges years ago. So this man tried to get housing for himself and his 3 kids, but he was denied based on a previous felony charge where he took a plea deal to get out of jail years before. So Anderson argues if he was white, it would be statistically unlikely he would have ever been convicted. But as an African-American man facing a racialized stigma in the criminal justice system, many people plead out so they can get back to their lives. And no one is explaining, because they have inadequate legal counsel, the long-term consequences that this could have on his life. So he was denied housing, and he became homeless, unable to live in government housing with his children. Okay, so also another big hurdle for people once they get out of prison is it's difficult to find employment. So just like housing, employment is an important step to establishing a successful transition from prison back into regular life. And there are a lot of fees that have to be paid when people are released from jail or prison. So, getting a job as soon as possible is really the best thing to do for someone, for stability. So the big part of this is that offenders are forced to check that box, meaning that, when you apply for a job, it'll say, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And you have to check the box, right? In addition to the discrimination people of color face, criminals have the burden of the felony label. So, many studies have shown that there's a lot of discrimination in just the names of the people who are applying to jobs, favoring white-sounding names over those that sound racially or ethnically diverse and that differ from the white norm. So this is a problem that all people of color face. Add to that the additional problems of the felony label, and the likelihood of finding employment becomes extremely improbable. So after this slide, I'm going to show you a quick clip from Huffington Post about a man named Jose that dropped the S from his name and was then able to find jobs, but not with his name, Jose. Once he turned his name to Joe, he got responses for his job applications. So I'm going to show you that right after this slide. Okay, so employers are unlikely to employ felons, less than a quarter of employers. And even those who do will often terminate them at the smallest issue due to the stigma of being a criminal, right? If anything gets broken, if anything's considered missing, that's the first person to be suspected, because just like what we talked about with labeling theory, because the way we understand a person is based on that stigma or label. But employers are more likely to hire ex-offenders for jobs with little contact with customers. So, for example, she talks about jobs like construction work or manufacturing, where people are away from customers so that the people employing them don't have to worry about the stigma affecting their likelihood of selling things. But these jobs are often far from where people live. They are often low pay, so that can be a problem as well.
Jose Zamora, and I had to drop a letter to get the title. Every morning I wake up, go on Craigslist and apply to as many jobs, every job that I feel qualified for. About 50 to 100 a day for months. No phone calls, no emails, nothing. One day I just thought, what if I try Joe? Just remove the S in my name and maybe I can make some dollar signs. The Monday I decided to go from Jose to Joe. 7 days later, the next Monday, that's when all the responses started coming. That's when all the replies and the emails. The position is open, we want to meet with you. Call us back. I was applying for the same exact jobs, the exact same resume, the exact same experience, just a different name. Sometimes I don't even think people know or conscious or aware that they're judging, even if it's by a name, but I think we all do it all the time.
So when it comes to, Black men in the job market, they are the most severely disadvantaged applicants. So this is true whether or not they're felons, but for those who are, the criminal record makes finding a job much less likely. So this is strongly affected by the stigma of a criminal record, which has to do with that deviance mindset, right? And the historical constructions of Black men as violent criminals that we've seen throughout time, the media's current message, which portrays Black men as gangsters or criminals. So Black men have to go up against these societally constructed preconceived notions of what Black men are so that they can try to get employment. So as a result, they're the least likely to receive a job, and a third of young Black men are out of work in the US. So this racialized understanding, affects this basically they blame African American young men saying, well, they're just not willing to work, right? But they ignore the institutional barriers that make gainful, legitimate employment so difficult for these men. So we talked a little bit about debtors' prisons before, but this is where I'm going to show you that video clip we talked about previously in class. So, there's a lot of problems paying off debt after people get out of jail, even though they're routinely put in prison for not paying fines. After someone is released from jail, they have even more penalties placed upon them. So they often have legal fees, restitution fees, other fees, penalties, which further place a burden on low-income people who are interacting with the system, much more frequently. So rich people can pay their fine. They can get back to their life. But the poor are the ones who suffer innumerably through the system, right? That idea of not just who suffers through the system, but who benefits from a system where you have to pay to get out, the rich. Right? So there is this idea of a debt to society, right? We have this social ideology that a prisoner needs to, quote unquote, pay for his or her crimes, right? So this resembles that Jim Crow system of control where Black lives were heavily penalized through numerous erroneous infractions, such as making eye contact with a white woman, right? So she also gives these examples of Ohio, Florida, and Alabama. So these are areas where a court can order probationers to pay at least $50 a month supervision fee as a condition of probation. Failure to pay the additional community control sanctions can cause additional sanctions, such as going back to jail, modification of their sentence, that kind of thing. So many states utilize what are called poverty payments, which pile on additional late fees, payment plan fees, and interest when an individual was unable to pay their debt all at once. So this often enriches private debt collectors in the process. So I'm going to show you a clip about that at the end of this slide that's specifically about how companies make money off of other people having to pay these, outrageous fees that are stuck and locked in poverty. So some of the collections are exorbitant. Alabama charges a 30% collection fee. Florida allows private debt collectors to tack on 40% surcharge to the underlying debt. So I know if you were trying to get a credit card, you would say 40%, that's ridiculous, right? But that's kind of the situation that a lot of these people are in, with no choice of their own. So there's very strict penalties for those who don't pay this debt to society. You have to go back to prison and be back in that same cycle. So there's another clip here I'm going to show you as well. I'm going to show you both of these clips right now.
Y'all get on this side. We're gonna have to push it backwards. No, we're not. I tried to push it off of my car, then it's gonna be tore up and worse.
Let us get going.
This is an everyday thing. Yeah, I probably don't have enough gas and the starter's gone out of it, so you got to do this every time you want to leave in that car. And we was just going to the gas station. They pulled us over and they wrote me a seatbelt ticket, and it come out to be $41. I didn't have no money to pay, so they charged me $10 to put me on JCS probation. And JCS, I don't get why they're in the picture. This is between me and the courts, not another business.
There is an entire industry devoted to making money off of people who can't pay.
Normally, an offender is put on probation to make sure that they're not posing a threat to public safety if they're not going to be put into prison. But we see a lot of courts really just hiring probation companies because they want to hire a debt collector and calling it probation.
Judicial Correction Services is a private company that allegedly provides private probation services. Essentially, they're a collection agency.
Private probation companies don't charge the courts they work for. Instead, they bill the people they supervise directly in fees every month that they're on probation. That's how they make profits. We found widespread abuses plaguing this whole industry, ignoring evidence that people are actually making heroic efforts to pay down their debts.
Is this all the money you got?
All of it.
Being poor has never been a crime in this country.
And yet, we are still throwing people into prison for owing money and not paying it back.
I've heard people going to jail for not paying their fines. That's one thing around here that will get you in jail quick, is not paying your probation. They will come get you for that quicker than not paying your child support.
Probation is supposed to be a way to keep people out of prison who don't really belong there. Private probation really turns all of that on its head.
It's essentially a debtor's prison.
Pretty much all of Columbiana's in there.
Just about everybody I know has had to and still are going through it.
Yeah, every time you go to court, it's like a family reunion.
One of the really perverse things is that often the poorest communities are the best markets for them. In a place where people really struggle, people wind up on probation in large numbers and for very long periods of time, and that translates into big money in fees for probation companies.
So when profit becomes the driving force, civil rights get thrown under the bus.
That's just about as far as I can get it from the inside. I have to have help getting it the rest of the way. Columbiana is a very small town. There's just a lot of land and roads, and then like what stores we do have, there's not really that many. I've applied for Fred's, Piggly Wiggly, Target. I would love to have a job. I'm not broke all the time. JCS adds on $35 every month, even if you're making progress on it or not. It's almost impossible when you are 17 with no income. I live with my mom and my sisters and my 2 nephews, and my mom is on disability. She pays all of the bills, and if she can give me anything, she will give me a little bit to put towards my ticket, but there's usually not much left. It is very hard. $40 is very hard to come by. And once you get $40 or something like that around here, usually you put that in gas to get where you need to be.
We're looking at offenders who would not be on probation at all if they had more money. They wind up actually paying more than the person of means over time and is faced with the continual risk of incarceration if they fall behind on their payments.
Here is the actual ticket I got, paid $10, fees $35, and then fine balance $41. And it shows that it went towards my fees and my fine stayed the same. And then this one right here shows I paid another $10. It shows that the fees went down, but fine is still $41. I've told the judge that I had the money to pay for the ticket and I couldn't afford the rest of the fees, and he said that that wasn't his problem, that I could just put that $41 towards the probation. And then I got another one that shows I paid $41 even, and the fine has not been touched, not one time, all the money I've paid. And see this paper right here, it says a payment is needed. If you fail to appear, a warrant will be issued for your arrest.
A lot of companies in the private probation industry are run by people who are former law enforcement. JCS is run by a man named Robert McMichael, who is a former sheriff and U.S. Marshal. And there's no question that those connections often pave the way to them getting the business that they get.
The system is horribly broken. If you can't pay, you're poor, then you're going to be placed in the hands of JCS, threatened with jail, and in many times jail.
Hundreds of people locked up
1,000 people every month in Alabama because they
for
cannot
simply
afford
failing to pay.
fine.
They only attacked the court.
It was either pay or go to jail.
They threatened me with jail.
It's not me refusing to pay these tickets because I pay them.
New York Times, quote, "There are real constitutional issues at stake."
There are 2 federal lawsuits that are going on against JCS. We're challenging that whole system, the fact that these people were indigent, that they were forced to pay additional funds, and then were ultimately jailed because they couldn't pay these fines that were demanded by JCS.
I have to go back to court and I have to figure out how to come up with half of it right then, and I cannot leave the building until I do, or I will be locked up. I'm not trying to get out of my ticket. I was guilty. I deserve the ticket. But all this probation fees they tack on, I can't afford it, and I'd really like to be able to just pay it and be done with it.
Georgia passed a law transferring probation services to the counties, and that allowed them to privatize their probation services for misdemeanor crimes, put behind bars for being poor. That's how a group of local attorneys describe arrest warrants requested by Sentinel Offender Services for misdemeanor offenders.
We're all basically low income. They live paycheck to paycheck. My husband and I, we've been married 32 years. We have 2 daughters, and that's my younger daughter when she was probably about 5. In 2006, I was pulled over for DUI. I was sentenced to Columbia County. I sat there for 8 months. Sentinel put me on 2 years probation. In 2008, my probation was over. I paid my fine. In 2012, Labor Day weekend, a police officer pulled in. I was walking my dogs around the front of that trailer. The officer come in here and he got out and he asked me to stop. And then he come back saying there was a hold on me in Columbia County. And I said, for what? And he said, violation of probation. I'd been off probation for 4 years. I said, no, officer, I believe you're making a really bad mistake. He says, well, I still have to take her in. And that's when I sat in Columbia County for 20 days. Judge Danny Craig asked Sentinel, why is she still on probation when she was off 4 years ago? And they had took it upon themselves to reinstate me without a judge's order or anything, back on probation, just to get the monthly fee. And he sent me home. I was off of it. But my husband still had to pay $156. Yeah, it makes you scared. You wonder about going in a grocery store or just out walking your dogs. A police officer might come by and arrest you again. I do realize I shouldn't have been drinking and driving, and that I did make a mistake, and I did pay for it. But they want to drag it out just for their profit. And there's so many out there that they're using like that.
A disabled Augusta veteran locked up because he couldn't pay a fee ticket that turned into jail time and blamed Sentinel Offender Services. 3 people currently jailed in Richmond County are joining the legal fight against Sentinel. About 10,000 Richmond County residents with outstanding arrest warrants taken out by Sentinel.
So when I walked out of the courtroom after that 20 days, a lawyer was waiting outside for me. And he said, you know, they were holding you illegally, and I'd like to really talk to you.
So here we are talking about a lady who stayed in the Columbia County jail now for about 20 days at $50 a day. It cost the county $1,000. It cost the lady her freedom. So Sentinel could collect $157. I mean, that's what we're dealing with.
Sentinel is a big company, but it's family held. The owner of the company is Bob Contestable. His son, Mark, is largely responsible for running the company's for-profit probation business out of Georgia. Many company officials are quite eager to blame the courts. The reality is that they have an enormous amount of discretion in their day-to-day interactions with the people that they supervise, and many of the decisions they make are not done in consultation with the courts at all. There's a lot of power that the courts delegate, sometimes improperly, to these companies, but the companies have a very direct responsibility for all of this as well.
Wave for the camera. She just got married, she just got back from the Caribbean. So I must pay them okay, because they can do that, right? I'm Dale Allen, I'm the Chief Probation Officer of Athens Clarke County Probation Services. Overall, I've been in the criminal justice field for over 35 years. One of the contributing factors to us deciding to transition from private probation to governmental probation was a request of the judges for more accountability, more transparency. We do believe we're 100% transparent. All my records are open. My fines, my fees, where the money goes, my budget is open record. I don't feel any pressure whatsoever to collect a certain amount of fees. We are not here to make a profit. The concept of locking people up for money goes against every instinct I have as a manager of probation. I actually call it the economics of doing the right thing. If they cannot pay, legitimately cannot pay, then it's to our community's best interest, it's to my government's best interest to work with them any way you can, short of incarcerating.
I think that most people like to imagine that in 21st century America there's no such thing as a debtor's prison anymore. That's not true. There are people in courts all across this country losing their freedom, not just because they're not able to come up with the money to pay down a fine, but because they're falling behind on payments to a private for-profit company that's been allowed to collect fees from them.
JCS, Sentinel, their interest is to make money, not to serve the judicial system.
Without question, the most urgent need is for laws at the state level that impose strict oversight and accountability on these companies and the situations where they can and should not be able to collect fines from people.
They don't show like they care about people. Even if you're trying, you know, to do what's right.
They don't help nobody. They don't, I mean, there's really no purpose but just for them to get money.
We have to go by the laws, and I feel they ought to too. Who do they have to answer to for doing wrong?
Okay, so then moving on to food. So, TAMF, basically until 1996, it was assumed that poor mothers should receive some sort of minimal assistance to help them take care of their children. And, you know, once welfare reform was signed into law, aid was capped for 5 years for life, making it much harder for poor mothers to support their children. Which was done because of that political rhetoric, right? We talked about in class about welfare queens, right? Which was racially coded in its own way to portray black women as just leeches on welfare, living off the government's dime. So this reform dramatically affected low-income women of color. So it's one of those things, if you get out of prison and you don't have money to pay for food, how do you eat, right? The structure of these corrections processes favor those who have money. Right? So again, we can talk about who suffers, but who profits is those who have money. They get out of prison, they do something wrong. It doesn't matter that they don't get public assistance, right? Because they have financial resources. So, you know, basically they don't have to think about those people that don't. And since the poor live in communities most targeted by police, the majority of those incarcerated are impoverished, meaning that those problems are happening for the majority of those people dealing with the criminal justice system. They're getting out and just trying to feed themselves. So the law basically requires the states permanently ban individuals with drug-related felony convictions from receiving federally funded public assistance. So again, especially for women that may be supporting a family, this is very detrimental. So really, how are criminals going to be able to feed themselves if they don't have the money to pay for food out of their pocket? right? What are they going to have to do in order to feed themselves and feed their families? That's a very difficult situation to put someone in, right? Especially when they're already having issues with jobs, already having issues with housing, etc. Also, felons often lose the right to vote. So, this is a legal sanction that takes away full citizenship rights from felons, which we talked about previously in class. It just varies from state to state. There's only 2 states, Maine and Vermont, that allow felons to vote. But in a lot of places, it's 7 to 11 or 12 years. You're restricted. Some states, it's forever, where you're never able to vote again. And so, we talked about this before a bit in class, but felony disenfranchisement has a lot to do with the kind of shaping of the electorate, as the majority of the people that get swept up in the system themselves are low-income people of color that tend to vote Democratic. So Germany is an example. She talks about how, restricting voting rights is not the norm internationally, right? In Germany, they encourage prisoners to vote. Half of all European countries allow incarcerated people to vote either in prison or through kind of like an absentee ballot process. But, no other country in the world is like the U.S. Actually, the United Nations Human Rights Committee has charged that the U.S. disenfranchisement policies are discriminatory and violate international law. Here, it affects millions, compared to other countries who disenfranchise. That number's in the dozens or hundreds. So, just because of our population size as well and land size, our policies are really capturing a large proportion of the population. So really, though, there's no real explanation as to why criminals can't vote, right? There's a lot of research that shows that elections that have been close, hint, hint, wink, wink, right? I guess just because we're right on the heels of one that just was very close, right? So research shows that elections that were close would have been decided by the millions of people that have been and are historically disenfranchised. So even when felons are given the right back, many are scared to register because of contact that they would have to make with government authorities. So, there's a distrust of the system, the way people get swept up, the kind of lack of resources and aid that they get after makes them feel very wary to ask for service or help or any contact. So this is a problem where a lot of felons don't know that they are eligible to vote after a series of years and think that they're never able to. So, these are basically another important way that there's a legal discrimination against this whole group of people that have a felony stigma. Also, there's social issues with being a criminal, right? So you're given formal sanctions, but for most felons, it's the stigma and the shame that follows them that's the worst part that they face. So the bigger problem is that you don't need to be convicted in a court of law to face a stigma. Many Black youth face the assumption that they will be criminals from cradle to grave. So if you quote unquote look like or quote unquote seem like a criminal, you are subjected to discrimination in various factors of your life. So it's the way that we consider groups of people in the culture, especially ethnic and racial minorities, to just be deviant, to be criminal. And these associations have been made so strongly in our culture that, of course, shapes our thinking. So, this is important when it comes to recidivism, because if people are not given the opportunity to change their social standing, to be incorporated back into the community, then it's very likely that they're going to fall into their old ways and go back to prison through recidivism, right? The fact that a large proportion of people that are released from prison end up back in the system within a couple of years, right? So we need to be looking at what's going on there. So people that are given a chance often can then be agents of change themselves. So I'm going to show you this clip about just that kind of program.
I understand that this video ain't for everybody, but for those of y'all who tired of going back to prison, you tired of getting caught in the same trap over and over again, this is for you, man. I did a lot of fighting that short fuse. That's really the core of my problems. Did all kinds of activities, drinking, smoking. I started carrying a gun, and that's around the time that I started doing robberies. When I was 14, I had gotten incarcerated for assaulting a police officer. They put me in a secondary school. That's where I met the mother of my children. So at 14, I became a felon. I also became a father. Even though I was working, it still wasn't enough. I think any individual, when their back's against the wall, they're gonna resort to what they know. That's what I did. I was indicted on almost 30 counts of robbery, and I ended up signing and being charged with 7 counts at the age of 20. And they gave me 9 years. Those were the roughest couple years of my life. I know all of you guys, you're not home right now. All the decisions you make are for survival. You gotta figure out how to get back home, how to get back to where you do have a say-so. Getting out, I knew that I had to find a job. At this point, coming home, all I had was the $50 that they give you when you leave. I didn't want to be a drain on anybody else. And so I had to figure out something for myself and my family pretty quick. I had this felony, and even the fast food places, they won't even talk to you. You won't even get an interview. If you put it on the application that you're a felon, they'll never call you. And if you mark that you're not a felon, they may hire you, but once they find out you're a felon, they'll fire you instantly. My criminal history stopped me from moving forward every time. I really didn't see much hope for a job. I had kind of started to give up. I also couldn't find a place for me and my family to live. Where my wife was living at, they didn't allow felons. I used to have to park my car around the corner, come through the back at nighttime. They tried to kick her and my kids out, and nobody would rent or lease to me. Society has a certain picture of what a felon is, and because of that perception, it limits our ability to be successful. I learned that nobody's gonna hand me a job. Nobody's gonna go out of their way to do anything for me. Every step towards progress has to come from me. My baby sister, she had a job working at Goodwill. They saw that I was a pretty big guy, that I could lift some things, and they asked me if I was interested in work. I was hired as a part-time employee. Due to my background, all I was allowed to do was take the donation from the donor and put it inside of the building. I worked that job for that 9 months like my life was dependent on it, because my life did depend on it. I was working as much as I could, and if overtime was offered, I'm working overtime. But at the end of the 2 weeks when I got that paycheck, it wasn't enough to cover my bills. It's a daily temptation. I'm still tempted now to go back to hustling. I used to make that much money in a day, in the afternoon. But I really just had to stick to my guns though. When I first started, I wasn't taken seriously at all. I acted like I was from the street. I dressed like I was from the street. In turn, I was treated like I was from the street. And in order to be taken serious by professionals, you have to become a professional yourself. I never used to smile in my life. I have a mug on my face all the time. But now I learned to smile. These small details, they have a great impact. And I felt like that one small step, it was the first step towards something else. It was around that time that the recycling department was just up and running. I put in the application, they promoted me. I just showed them everything that I could do. And then now I'm currently the aftermarket manager of environmental business services. I feel that an individual who's been incarcerated actually have an advantage over other individuals in the workplace. In order to make it in the penitentiary, you have to have the ability to adapt to your surroundings. And it's the same once you come into the workforce.
I was arrested for 2 counts of possession of a controlled substance. Now I'm responsible for what's coming in and out of the warehouse.
I did 10 years of probation, and I did 2 years with Texas Department of Corrections. Chapter. Now I'm the assistant manager of our environmental business service, which is recycling.
I'm able to hire other felons. And my goal here is that if I can be successful with this organization as a felon, other organizations are going to see that.
Treat everything like it's an investment. If you have a bank account, you can't go make a withdrawal if you never put anything in it.
It's not going to be easy. Nobody's going to give you a handout or a free ride. And really, people are going to work against you. People want to see you fail. Because it just proves the point that, we have no hope.
Just keep your head up. Don't give up. It's going to be hard.
Really, if it wasn't for those small successes, the larger successes aren't possible. I never imagined a couple years ago that I would be able to just live based off the paychecks that I collect. For a felon, we make mistakes, and that mistake stays with us for the rest of our lives. I found a way to earn myself a second chance. This isn't the final stop, this is just the beginning. I look forward to seeing all of you guys right here with me.
Also, your likelihood of encountering the system has so much to do with your socioeconomic background, your gender, your race, your ethnicity, your age, all of these things, these social factors, these, social institutions that we cannot change. They shape how people perceive us to either be trustworthy or not, or suspect. Right? And that's something that's kind of shaped independently and all around us. But of course, we internalize these things as well. So I'm going to show you a quick clip about this likelihood disparity.
Here are 50 white guys. Here are 50 black guys. Here's how many white guys can expect to go to prison in their lifetime. The chances amount to 1 out of 17. Now here's how many black guys can expect the same thing. The chances are 1 out of 3. Why? Lots of reasons. It's complicated, but one thing is clear. There's racial bias at every level of the criminal justice system. When blacks and whites commit the same kind of crimes, blacks are more likely to be arrested. Once arrested, they're more likely to be convicted. Once convicted, they're more likely to serve longer sentences. Look at the numbers in America's so-called war on drugs. About 14% of American drug users are black, as are about a quarter of drug sellers. Yet blacks are 34% of the people arrested for drug crimes. And those convicted of drug crimes, 46% are black. By the time we factor in sentencing, there are actually more black drug offenders than white ones in state prison and in federal prison. In the end, the incarceration rate for drug crimes is 10 times higher for blacks than it is for whites. These are the facts. Racial disparity in America's war on drugs is one big reason that 1 out of 3 black men can expect to go to prison in their lifetime.
She also talks about the silence in communities of color in relation to criminals. So, she talks about basically how, especially civil rights leaders haven't really talked much about the war on drugs as an issue until very recently. Actually, after her book was released. Because it was considered so taboo, right? And because of the stigma and the shame that's caused through this being labeled a criminal, a felon, a prisoner, communities don't want to talk about these things because of the shame that issues of incarceration bring. It negatively affects communities in many ways. So if, prominent civil rights leaders are standing up for people that are incarcerated when they're already in a marginalized group that's associated with criminality, it's very easy for people on the outside to kind of point to that and say, hey, look, they support criminals, right? Instead of really looking at the kind of structural issues and the institutional bias that is leading to these huge discrepancies in the system. So, it's considered shameful. So many neighbors don't even want to talk about the pains, that are going on within their neighborhood, because they don't want to face shame that results from the deviance, even if they weren't the ones doing that, if it's their family or someone, close to them. So the example she gives is Constance, how, she was a mother that suffered in silence with a lot of pain and issues that resulted from her son's incarceration. So while a lot of people, when you're in a problem, when you have especially an issue that's troubling you, you can turn to your church, right? Your temple, your mosque, whatever, your religious community in times of trouble, right? But when it comes to incarceration, there's this pain and burden that people do not share with their religious communities because they're afraid that people are going to shame them or judge them, hold them in contempt, or maybe not let them be part of that community anymore, right? So it's really sad. You have a lot of people that they're all experiencing these things, but they don't want to talk about it to each other because, it's shameful on them. And so this means that there's much needed support, especially emotional support, that isn't there for people because it's, they don't want to get judged for coming out talking about it. Even when they're not the one actually doing anything like drugs or committing crimes, they're just the people that are living with the consequences of someone else doing that. So also, she talks about passing as coping with the issue of being related as criminals. So many people whose family members are incarcerated don't want to be perceived in a negative light because they're working hard to be in a more secure position. So because of this, they often won't embrace a movement like freeing people from incarceration or, be very vocal in their community about the need to reform laws because, again, they don't want it to negatively affect how people treat them. And, they don't want to be related to that criminal activity. So, actually, so when it comes to passing, though, this was something that happened back in the Jim Crow era, where light-skinned African Americans would try to pass for white so that they could avoid having the criminal kind of stigma assumed on them, set them back, right? There's a very famous movie about this called Imitation of Life, where a young light-skinned black woman tries to pass for white and acts as if her mother is her housekeeper or servant. It's like, oh, the whole thing is horrifying to watch. Actually, the last time I checked, it was on Netflix, in case you really just want to be horrified. But anyway, horrifying to watch. But so she basically, long story short, she hooks up with a white dude. He eventually figures out, they date, like he proposes. He eventually figures out that she's black because of the whole kind of one-drop rule situation. She was very light-skinned, so she passed racially, but he figures it out, and then he murders her. So, the whole kind of moral of that story is just that, like, how common that was. It was a very dangerous proposition for people to racially pass, right? They might be able to survive themselves, as a lot of light-skinned people were able to kind of free themselves of criminal stigma and have some privilege in society that they would otherwise not get. But at the same time, the consequences were dire, right? For people that were caught trying to pass. So for many, though, the rewards were worth the risk. So there's also this idea that, like, people internalize the negative racialized messages that come to look at them, like, negatively or less than as a result. So meaning that it's not just like every group of people is socialized with these same kind of racial hierarchies. So people that are lower on a racial hierarchy also learn that they are supposed to be lower on a racial hierarchy. So a lot of people internalize this, right? And see themselves as there's something wrong with them, right? Because of the racialized structure of society. So it's very hard to separate our internalized feelings from the larger cultural perceptions. This is not just true about the felon or prison label, but it can also be seen in this white normative depictions of female beauty, or how that psychologically affects men and women of color. So I have this video clip here. That's just a trailer from a film that talks specifically about colorism, which really is this idea, like, I remember a student asked me once, could racism end? And it's like, well, yeah, sure, it's a structure in society, but the real issue isn't racism in the way that people characterize it. It's what we should look at it is white supremacy, right? It's the idea of a racial hierarchy where one group is at the top, right? As long as that exists, then there's going to be problems. Because obviously, even within racial groups, there's hierarchies, right? There's this colorism, meaning that people that are lighter skinned tend to be higher preferenced, or have more European-like features because they are more in league with what's in the hierarchy, right? So there's a lot of resentment that can also happen within communities of color, where some people that are light-skinned are preferenced and some people that are dark-skinned are maligned or mocked or treated, very negatively as a result of the melanin in their skin, right? So, people internalize what society tells them about Black bodies, whether they are, no matter who they are. So, for people that live within that space and have to hear what the culture says to denigrate them, of course there's going to be, it's like what we talked about before with social interactionism, right? The idea that our identity is shaped by how others look at us and treat us, and we respond to that treatment, right? So this kind of self-hatred that can come about this from especially a culture in which the beauty standard is not just extremely thin, extremely young, extremely whatever, but it's also extremely white. So, that can really be very difficult for people to contend with because of those institutionalized hierarchies of race. So anyway, I'm going to show you a clip about that right now.
Rise, dark girls. I can remember being in the bathtub asking my mom to put bleach in the water so that my skin would be lighter.
If we're all just hanging around and a dark-skinned girl will pass by, they'll be, oh, well, she's pretty for a dark-skinned girl. And I'm like, well, what is that supposed to mean?
I think I remember most saying that, if I had a little girl, I didn't want her to be dark.
This is not a phenomenon. It's just a reality in the Black culture.
I mean, dark-skinned women, I don't really like dark-skinned women. Like, they look funny beside me.
The impact that it has on those young children spiritually is that they actually start to devalue themselves in such a way where the spirit begins to shrink.
The consequences of not dealing with this issue is that we lay the foundation for future generations of Black women to deal with the madness. It becomes the norm for how we see ourselves.
One of the most popular products in the third world is skin whitening cream, which gives us a little bit of an idea of how people's perceptions of themselves. I mean, we're talking here about regions of the world where the overwhelming majority are not white.
We have a need for each other, a need for someone to show us, to lead us through example.
I think it's dangerous to not question things.
We need to become the architects of our own self-image. You are the keeper of your own soul.
So she talks about it as a minstrel show. So basically, she's talking about, this imagery and racial cultural history that she's referencing in the chapter. Minstrels were shows that mocked African Americans and were very popular during the Jim Crow era. Typically, white actors would don blackface and act, just very stupid or oafish or things like that to try and pretend that they were being African Americans. And it was just very insulting, very upsetting. Actually, I have a clip here I'm going to show you from the film, Spike Lee's movie Bamboozled, where he basically satirizes this idea in like the 90s as if they had started a new minstrel show within the 1990s. But basically, in the film I'm going to show you, there's this montage of the historical representations of these kind of Jim Crow era characters, right? The minstrel shows. Because I feel like she talks about a little bit of the book, but unless you see just how horrible they are, right? It's one of those things you can't unsee because it's so awful. And then when you really start to think about media as a messenger, right? How media is a form of social control. It really tells us what values we should have and who is right and who is wrong, right? When you see these old minstrel portrayals, you can really understand how the social and cultural value system of African Americans was so low because of the representations. So then you have to start looking at representations today, because it's so easy to look back into the past and be like, oh my God, that's terrible, because it is. Like, you're going to see them and they're horrible, right? But it becomes this thing where we often can see in the past what's so terrible that we can't see in front of our faces now. And the representation of African American, especially men, in pop culture, in music culture, as criminals, as kingpins, as pimps, as thugs, as gangsters. This shapes the cultural narrative of what it means to be a black man, right? So even though we can look back in the past and say, oh my God, how terrible the representations were, because they were, abhorrent, but they still are abhorrent, is what basically she's trying to say. They've just changed in what those presentations are. So, she says that this is designed to create more racial oppression because it controls the way that people perceive groups of people. If they're more likely to think they're a criminal, they're less likely to have empathy or support for this group. So, she says that older representations are gone, like in this bamboozled clip, but, modern blackface and modern minstrel representations of African Americans through such shows as The Real Housewives, Flavor of Love, things like that she was talking about, have these very stereotypical portrayals of African Americans, and it becomes this kind of grotesque way that, again, when we're separated from groups of people, especially there's a lot of residential segregation, that means that if you are not from the Black community, then you might not live near a lot of people that are African American. So that means that oftentimes what you're going to know the most about a group is the representations that you're going to see in the media. Right? Unless you know a lot of people from that community that can then break down those stereotypes for you, you often will just understand and see the representations through media, and not even just like movies, TVs, whatever, but like social media as well, and the kind of racial inherent bias that goes on in there that, that influences who we see to have value and who we don't. Just remember, how are we now kind of representing people in the same context as gangsters, right? So there's actually another documentary I really recommend, because I think Bamboozled is a great movie. You should watch the whole thing to get it in context. But also, there's this great documentary called, I believe, Real Latino, where it's like REEL, and it's about representations of Latinos within pop culture, and how, there was this kind of attempt in the same kind of portrayals to minimize contributions of Latinos, especially in American history, to kind of create this archetype bandito stereotype, which really denigrated people that fought in the war, and basically like turned them into a offensive stereotype. And a lot of that has just kind of morphed in the modern day. So if people were portrayed through minstrels as stupid and criminal and oafish, then people through like the bandito archetype were characterized as, criminal, suspicious, up to no good, right? And so how then can you see the portrayal of a lot of Latino men and women in films today, right? It's still like oftentimes as people that are involved in drugs or gangs or things of that nature. So it still kind of creates this like cholo archetype, which itself is just kind of a takeoff of the previous bandito archetype. So it's really, there have always been these racial stereotypes that people go like and adhere to, and we see those portrayals through our media systems. And a lot of us, if we're not coming in contact with diverse groups of people, I mean, we're lucky we live in Southern California. There's a lot of people around, right? Lots of different groups. But if you're like most Americans and you're not coming in direct contact with a lot of people that are different from who you are, you're not going to understand those groups other than how they are portrayed in the media. So these media portrayals are very important in how we understand groups, in whether or not we define them worth or not. Okay, so next time we're going to do this in-class activity, so we'll wait until then to get into that.